Hello, everyone. Today is June 15th, 2022, and we will talk today to great artist Michele Bajona from Mexico City. We will talk a little bit about his history. A little bit later today, I want to introduce again, if whoever missed that program about our new colors and watercolor line, and so we had 12 different colors, new colors, and they all in pens. And we will again talk a little bit later about why they're in pens. For special left 3 weeks of June, we will have 20% discount on all our travel sets, where you can choose any watercolors you like to try. And this is just special for this session. And I want let's go back to Michele. So Michele was born 1971 in Vicenza, Italy. And but now he lives and teaches in Mexico City. He specifically teaches watercolors. And when I saw first time his work, I was forever in love. And so that's why our story with Michele started a couple years ago. And so George had interview with Michele a couple months ago. We were preparing that session. Something happened, and so the session altogether 44 minutes. Unfortunately, we can't do this 44 minutes today, so we butchered that interview to 24 minutes. And so please stay with us. But at 11 o'clock Pacific time, online will be whole version of this video. Please check it. Michele is just absolutely great artist, and so his notes about watercolors are just great. So, right, like always, we will show you video first. Please ask the questions on right side of the screen. And right after 24 minutes, Michele will be with me, and George. I'm sorry, my name is Tatiana Zaitseva, and Natural Pigments. And I'm assisted by George O'Hanlon, like always. He's behind the camera. And so we will interview Michele, continue. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michele, and for joining us on this episode of the Artist Materials Advisor. And we're going to be talking about watercolor today. And I want to get some of your impressions about the Rublev watercolors, but in general, your process about watercolors, because I find that I enjoyed looking at your work, and now I get to meet you virtually at this point in time, but hopefully meet you in person at some point. So thank you.
Thank you, George. It's actually a pleasure to meet you. You know, this myth of George, who knows everything about, or a lot about uh, painting best practices in a way. The way we should be working with our materials, and also the way we can work better. So definitely, I embraced Rublev watercolors, which is basically natural pigment.
Right.
And also some other products you have, because I'm also interested in drawing, and I also do oil painting. So definitely I'm proud to be somehow part of the Rublev family, because there is something going on, in your small production, and creating products that are basically made with love. So, I'm all about love.
Tell me, so how did you mentioned that, of course, you do oil painting and watercolor, and I've got at least the impression that your main thrust now is more about watercolor. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but can you tell me if that is correct, and why did you choose or get into watercolor mostly at this point in time?
Yeah, no, it is correct. It's my technique by election,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean I don't do other, I don't experiment with other techniques. And actually, recently I've been drawing a lot, and watercolor has been part of my process of producing a drawing. Studying the classics, the old masters, I realized they do use a lot of washes, and even to create the base of their drawings, there's a lot of watercolor involved or ink. And I did find in watercolor, since I was very young, like the perfect technique, because I tend to control a lot, and watercolor doesn't let me. So, it does to a certain degree. And so I love that, because for me, that's always been something therapeutic in a way. So I do love to create art, but watercolor makes it better somehow,
Mm-hmm.
because of the spontaneous. Well, it is spontaneous, and it gives something that other techniques probably don't, which is this element of surprise. This natural element that can disrupt something you've done. When water really plays with you and you play with water, there is something very special that happens at that point, both for the painting, which is our main focus, but also for yourself, because you are involved into a meditative and playful game, which makes it fun. It's never the same. You can't repeat watercolor. And you might be able to repeat some drawings and oil paintings, but a watercolor is pure gesture and expression.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're doing it like me, with a lot of reference to the classics and old masters, it is still something unique that, I think, it's just pure magic.
Talking about the Rublev watercolors, now that you've been working with them for a little bit of time now, do you find them different from possibly other watercolors you've used? And I also want to talk to you about, I know you're making your own watercolors too, which is fantastic, and I want to talk about that too. So what do you find differently?
Well, there's two things. You can buy really good watercolors, but the fact that the reason why I do like the Rublev is I like to work with many with many colors, but I try to keep my palette really limited.
Mm-hmm.
And I always loved to work with grounds, like with the iron oxides, materials that are natural and come from the ground. And Rublev has this amazing selection.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful names, by the way. Ambrogio Yellow Earth. That's very good. I like to work with the tube, and Rublev comes with tubes that are like 15 millimeters. I used to find this, when I was younger, but not anymore. Now, if you want to buy a professional watercolor, it will be 5 millimeters, right? It's insane. I don't like that. Also, I like the way the pigment concentration in the tube is respected, and there's just the binder and the pigment, which I love. And I love also all the products that are related to it. I can make my own paint, as you said before. I have my grinder, I have my kit, which also comes with a wonderful video on how to make your own paint. And I have pigments, by your generous supporting me with lots of different pigments. This is a very expensive pigment, and to be able to create your own colors, I think there are very few companies that do both. create products and also the final product, but also gives you the tools for you to make your own. You also create, a watercolor medium. You give a lot of freedom to an artist in order to expand and experiment, and it's just easy. It makes it really easy to find everything in the right place. When I do draw, I like to prepare the surface, so I don't make a drawing. I don't know if I can show you. Can I show? Maybe I'm going against the rules. But this, for example, it's a drawing that has been done with watercolor by Rublev as a base, and then working with chalks, you can sort of build up the form, the volume. And I also used some washes in it. So it's not that just my watercolors. I'm glad you like them, but I use watercolors even when I need to transfer something on a canvas or on a panel for an oil painting. I do use watercolor as well.
Mm-hmm.
I find it like as one of the most versatile and flexible techniques that are out there. Besides, you don't throw away any pigment. You basically always have the possibility to reuse. This looks like a mess, right? But you don't have to clean your palette, because you can always use the pigment that is left over. There's no problem in it throwing away paint. Every single pigment is reused. When I work with watercolors, I like to use the white of the paper. Therefore, I don't prepare it beforehand. Although sometimes I do work wet on wet from the very beginning, so I might just extend some water on top of the paper. But mostly I do it later, like a wash. If the watercolor lost its consistency throughout, which means if I don't have a general tone to the watercolor and I want to get a strong atmospheric effect in the final painting, I might actually apply a thin layer of paint on top of a finished watercolor. It takes time, and you need to experiment with something you might want to mess around with, but it can be done, and it has saved a lot of my works. Some works that didn't have a convincing background. I was convinced that watercolors would be, something very ephemeral. You do it, and then what's done, it's done, and then you just leave it there. But recently, I've been sort of finding ways to keep working on watercolors for days, and definitely you need a good support for that.
Have you ever used white watercolor or gouache in any of your work?
Very little, but I love it. Very little, but I love it. Especially for when you paint landscapes and you work with certain transparent backgrounds. You might want to use some gouache for the foreground. I have in mind this beautiful lake, small lake painted by Zorn, where you have actually on the water some more opaque paint, definitely with the addition of white wash. I would use white wash more than white watercolor because it's more efficient in a way. But I don't want to use it to cover up something. I just want to use it because it's a tool to create transparencies and more opaque layers. Just for that. I don't use it for correction, because you can totally correct a watercolor and you can actually almost get to the white of the paper if you wanted to. This myth that watercolor can be undone, it's a myth. If you have been working with watercolor for quite some time, as I did, you just need the right brush.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely need the right brush to erase properly. But painting is a process of applying material, and also it is, in fact, a process of taking some material off.
Mm-hmm.
This works in oil paintings, this works in watercolors, definitely works in drawing. So why does it, why is it like accepted that we erase in drawing and not in watercolor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can do really fine, interesting details in watercolor by removing pigment. Also, watercolor I find really beautiful because you can move pigment around using the medium of water. So when you have this little film of water on your paper, you are able to create incredible things, different effects by just moving the pigment around.
Mm-hmm.
That's I find watercolor really novel in that sense, more than chromatically in terms of uh, the brush strokes, the effects that you can leave on the paper, and also that every single trace is there on the paper itself. So it's a really honest, completely true process. For me, watercolor is John Singer Sargent. For me, watercolor is Andrew Wyatt. For me, it's definitely actually Andrew Wyatt did use it in a dry way. But it is important to be able to have all the tools to create what we want. So there is no limitation as long as you learn, and the learning process allows you to paint anything you want. So what I like about using watercolor wet over wet is that it definitely transmits feelings at a deeper level. When I work dry over dry, it's just for fine details. I do that, but it's just for texture, and it's just in very particular occasions. I really like to use wet over wet, and I do think that it is sort of what watercolor wants to do, and the name itself says that water has to be involved, and the more water is involved in the process, the better the watercolor result, because the watercolor being so transparent, if you look at a watercolor, you see the entire story of that painting. If you look at an oil painting, it depends who did it, right? Some story of that painting might need to be looked at with X-rays.
Mm-hmm.
In a watercolor, you see every single mark, and this is definitely how we should be painting in a watercolor technique. And I'm starting to learn also how to mix colors in a way that it's really interesting to me, because somehow a lot of people that use watercolors, they tend to just take it out of the tube or just go to that particular pan and get the color straight from there onto the paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it is fascinating how mixing the watercolors we can reach an incredible amount of different colors in our palette. Our palette, or in a salad, which is 10 colors, can become so much bigger. And a lot of people look for space to mix their colors when they paint with oil, but they don't when they paint with watercolor. They're just like there with the little pan, trying to get the little tree on the little piece of paper. Watercolor, when you paint big, it's amazing. That's why I use tubes. When the watercolor comes straight from the tube, it's creamy. I like how Rublev really respects, the colors. So some colors come out from the tube differently than others. This is a testimony that they're authentic and there's no other, how do you call, fillers in them. And so when you deal with colors and when you start mixing colors in watercolor, you'll be surprised because the pigments do have a love-hate relationship much more evident in watercolor than with other techniques. In watercolor, when they dissolve in the medium of water, they're just, because when in the binder, they're like sort of crystallized into the binder. But when they are free to go, it's amazing. It's amazing.
A lot of watercolorists will talk about granulation. Is that a factor that you use in your painting?
Well, some artists really tend to look into those, and use those colors that can give them the effect they want. So granulation in portraits, which is what I do mostly, can be important for background, maybe some textures that you might want to be experimenting with, but not really to represent the skin tones or those part of the anatomy. I do a lot of figure and watercolor as well. I do love the effect, but I find it more useful when I do landscapes and especially architecture. I do find it very useful when you do a street view or maybe paintings at dusk, which is really what we try to do, right, George? I think what we do as painters is to create emotions. And if I were an abstract painter, I would definitely play with granulation a lot more. And I like the fact that there is some sort of abstraction in every watercolor, even more so than drawings or oil painting or other techniques. Because really, when you paint with watercolors, the water itself is creating this abstraction. And if you are a realist painter or you're going through all the process of creating volumes, and through these volumes represent reality the way that Renaissance has basically taught us to do. In watercolor, it becomes really an interesting thing because you are doing a painting with a certain dose of realism, and then the technique itself adds that abstraction, which is basically what we do in every technique. We decompose reality to build it again on a bidimensional surface. But with watercolor, that goes to a different level because you can really, you don't have to worry too much. With more water, you create an effect that you weren't even.
Are there any other observations that you've made about, let's say, the different pigments in watercolors? Because, of course, each pigment will have a different behavior. Some notice maybe a blossoming effect where the pigment spreads out into the water more so perhaps than other pigments.
True. Not just that, but also there is a combination that works and other combinations when you mix your colors that don't. And so color theory has been taught in many different techniques, but in watercolor, there are very few teachers or artists that are involved into that very much, So I've been doing some research, and my palette which is actually available on your page, is definitely, actually that's sort of a limited version of it. Has definitely a lot to do with how pigment reacts with the other. When we paint a portrait, we need to achieve two different goals. The first one is to create a good work of art. The second one is we want to give soul to this work of art.
Mhm.
A lot of portraits are missing the point. They don't capture the essence of the person we are trying to portray. So I would say it is not just a matter of technique, but it is definitely a matter of understanding what we want to do with a portrait and how we relate to the person that is there in front of you. I highly recommend to do portraits from life, because when we work with pictures, we just don't. It's impossible to capture the personality of a subject.
Mhm.
Also, there is too much information in the photography in the photograph. It's too much information, and that is going to go into the painting somehow, ruining the painting. And the information we want is not in the picture. So definitely work from life. I always do that. With COVID, it's been a little bit more difficult, but I've been working on some pictures, and in some of my work, you can see, some famous actors, because I like to catch, some stills from movies, which I find it really interesting because it's an imaging movement, so I can see the three dimensions of a face. This is really important. So for the technique itself, I would recommend for watercolor to start with something else. Maybe stay in the figurative figure in watercolor. It's beautiful and it's fast and it's so much fun. You're in front of a model and you can actually get most of the gesture in the first 3 minutes. It's pretty amazing. Something that the graphite, you're very frustrated when you have short poses because you don't get to it. With watercolor, you're already rendering, you're already creating tonal values immediately. So it's really good for figurative. And when you step up to portraiture in watercolor, George, I think it's the most difficult thing you can do in painting, in art, is to do a portrait in watercolor. That's why I teach that, because I think a good teacher can really help getting to a good level almost right away. And then it's a lot of practice, because portraiture, it's really the most difficult thing to do.
Michele, we definitely butchered that video because I know you were so excited during that video. And, I think I studied or even remember every your word because while George was working on your video and cutting from this 40 minutes, it was a very difficult job to do. So I know. So, but again, I remind you, 11 o'clock, we will have full links of this video online. And so then
it'll be on YouTube, on the same YouTube channel.
Okay. So I just can't tell you my love to you, Michele. So because yes, I know it's once I saw this, it's like, and it's always like I watch your videos, you making portraits. It's like it's very easy, although you're saying that it's the most difficult thing to do.
Well, I'm glad I make it look easy.
Yeah. And now
watercolor is not easy, but we have to enjoy the process. And so we are the ones who make it difficult, really, and I guess if you let yourself go and you don't worry about the final result, you are more likely to get a good final result. Yeah.
So what we realize with these interviews with artists, it makes our actually life much easier because I can show you so many colors and explain to you how we make it and so for what purpose, and then suddenly artist comes and so then everything have different life. And so that's why with your way to express, like I can tell you this, ambrosia, nobody knew what it is. So once in a while people buy the pigments, but basically the watercolor was almost forgotten for probably like for 5 years. Nobody knew. Once in a while people like, what, nice name, so let me try. After when you started, and looks like your students started to use it, and so then suddenly it's become a thing now. So
I didn't
ambrosia
know
is
that. Well, it's a wonderful name. Actually, who I bet George put that name on, right? Or was it you?
no, it's
No, it's
actually
actually because the deposits are near that area in northern Italy.
Oh, wow.
So what we tried to do most companies have like either
fancy schmancy names, how I call that.
they're either fanciful names or they're historical names, like Venetian red, as an example. That was a pigment that came from Veneto region, and there's these deposits that are in the not far from there it is, and not far from
Veneto?
From Venice. But we did is we source a lot of these earth colors from northern Italy and along the coast near Naples, and so we try to name them accordingly to where a vicinity where they come from. So that was the whole point of that.
So now
I
you
get
tell us. So then you teach mostly on Mexico City.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, in person. My studio is in Mexico, and it's part of a cultural center, basically a small cultural community. We do different events, and part of it is also my workshops, which are in a really wonderful place. It's an old factory, and it looks really great, and it's really big. And now with COVID, it's really helpful to be doing workshops in such a big space. And for what concerns the other courses which are online, because we need to get to to a lot of people and share the knowledge to everybody. Some of them are quite inexpensive and with a sort of a democratic price, which is the Domestika produced courses, which we have 2 courses on Domestika. And the other formula is through Zoom, via Zoom, doing live demonstrations, and I try to create small courses of a month. Each month we change the theme, and this month is it's actually I was painting a Vicenza street view yesterday, and Venice is next Tuesday, and
Okay.
whatever makes us free to paint and meet together and have a good time. We're so separated,
Yes.
so
Yes.
I like these groups to be small so that we can get to know each other, and the group is actually always a great support for any course. Really, the group makes the class. The group makes the course. I have done courses that are so excellent, right? So, but mostly because of the group itself.
Yeah. And so then our people can find your courses on Domestika. Yes, is that correct?
It's correct. And in my webpage, you actually get the link to the course, so it's much easier, which is michelebajona.com. I don't know if you can put it down there.
We
But
will.
honestly,
George will put that,
I'll put that
information in the
I'll
chat.
put that in the comments.
Yes.
And
in the comments.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way, also because that way you help me more than Domestika. Otherwise, you help Domestika more than me. So if you use my link, you help a great deal. And those courses are a lot of fun. And actually, one is on watercolor and the other one is on drawing, and it's about Leonardo da Vinci and his techniques, part of it with some of your material, and you will find, as a student, you will find a lot of Rublev material in the course itself, when I explain how to prepare the paper. And recently I've been using Ambrogio Yellow Earth, my friend,
Okay.
on a drawing. I want to show you.
Okay.
On this drawing, which is, studying Michelangelo, we were trying to get the right tone of the base of the paper. And honestly, we couldn't find it. And I was using ink. And then I decided, I don't know if you can see anything because the sun just got out. But basically, I just put some Ambrogio afterwards. And it made the magic, All in a sudden, it took, it became alive. So we can, as I said before, we can always use watercolor to adjust a few general tones of our final products, even if we're using other tools such as charcoal or sanguine, or those trois crayons techniques can have a base, and also can have a base afterwards. You can draw something on I would call it stupid white piece of paper, and then all of a sudden we can use watercolor to make this paper become something else. And
then you don't
that
need to buy the colored paper. Yes.
You don't need to buy the color paper. Actually, I don't. It's
so we
perfect,
had the question about watercolor is grainy. So just to answer that question, so we yes, some of them absolutely are, and due to the pigment particle size. And it's same like we have in oil colors, Rublev line. So we use exactly the same pigments in watercolors. And so specifically our French colors having bigger particles, so the granulation is, the granulation is there. And but some of them, of course, they have smaller particles, like if you will look like blue rich yellow ochre or Prussian blue, or ultramarine. Ultramarine can give a little bit, but not much. And so, but it's like Michele said, so every color is different, and it will be learning curve, because again, the 20th century brought to artists kind of like all colors overall, they behave the same. They obviously they look different because of the colors, but the behavior was the same. So because in most cases these days companies are using dyes, that's why your watercolors are there just like floating, and they are running from you, where the with Rublev colors a little bit different behavior. And so
rather than dyes, it's actually very fine particles.
Yes.
So, and then which creates more staining.
Yes.
And,
on dyes. On dyes. Yes. So what? Oh, you mean
the pigments? The pigments are so fine, and so they become because of the very fine particle size, they tend to stain the paper more. They're a little more difficult to lift up. Not impossible, but of course it depends. Depends on,
because if it's bigger particles, they picking up very easy. And
we had a question. I'm sorry.
It also depends. But when you want to lift up a color, it really depends on the color itself. How much it stains. And yes, of course, the quality of pigments has gone down the drain, because pigments are produced for bigger bigger business than art supplies. So therefore cars, and therefore they are so much smaller. And I love how you preserve the integrity of the pigments, looking for the original ones. I'm sure it's not easy, but if it takes you to Italy and the Amalfi Coast, that's good too, right?
Yes.
you lift the color much easier on a cotton paper than on pulp cellulose paper, but you also need to test the paper. But a lot of watercolor is about the paper, honestly. So,
And
yeah,
in fact,
you need to try.
that's a question, Michele. Which paper do you prefer? That's from our audience here.
Well, that's a big question.
And in a bigger video, Michele answered that question, but I would like you address right now. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure I do. Me and George had a chat for like an hour. It was long.
Yeah.
It was very. And thank you for your patience in editing all that. I guess I also got to know George much better. It's very interesting life. We should make an interview. I mean, now we should reverse part and make an interview.
Yes.
I'm gonna interview George next
Yes.
time. And Tatiana. I would say any cotton paper will do the job. Some brands might be. It's really so personal. I guess somebody is asking me what paper do I use so that they think it's gonna solve their problem. It's gonna help in terms of what kind of paper, but the brand itself doesn't really matter that much. Although I am in love with Arch paper, Arches is said in Spanish, which is a paper from France, and it's now everything's been bought by Canson, and Canson has been bought by Fila, and but there's some Waterford is really also an excellent paper. Anything that is 300 grams, which is it? I think it's 14, right? And then that has from that up, right? So it's thick and stable, and that has either a cold press or rough texture will do. In terms of techniques that are similar to the one I use. Otherwise, you can use hot press, but actually I use hot press much more for drawings, right? So drawings will take hot press much better. With
I think you
watercolor,
mentioned Stonehenge.
See, of course,
Legion, yes.
Legion, yeah.
That's from Legion. You know, they're very nice, and that's also one I use. I was using that because when I went to New York to shoot the video for Domestica, Legion gave me a block, a watercolor block, and it was really nice, you know, of them, and I used it for a month or so, and yeah, because I was much more into drawing at that time. But we got also the colored paper by Legion, and you have products by Legion too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, for the silver point.
Another question, George.
I'll put this one about somebody wants to know, can you share what you feel is the advantage to making your own watercolors? For example, can you create your own mixtures this way?
Yes, I do that. And I have this little product here, which helps me a lot.
You're a great advertiser, so we don't need to do that. Great, yes. It's actually very balanced formula. That's why it works basically like it's foolproof. You can do whatever you want. You can make your own gouache if you want.
Yeah, and also it does vary because if I use two pigments like these ones, they're quite similar, and so the amounts of and one is the raw sienna and the other one is burnt sienna. So they have very similar characteristics. They're like iron oxides. They come from Italy. They're basically ground, and the amount of well, let's talk about the binder. The binder is Arabic gum and glycerin mostly, or more. You know, in older times it was like, you know, honey, sugar, I guess. Maybe George can be.
That's what we use on 19th century recipes. It's syrups.
Yeah, glycerin was introduced into watercolors in about 1830, and before that, it was actually not even honey. It was It was rock sugar. It was like crystallized sugar, and they would dissolve that into water. So that was actually even way
A,
before
delici-
that.
a delicious binder.
Yes, very sweet.
I mean, the percentage of pigment and binder may vary depending on the pigment itself. And so it's about, you need experience, or you buy Rublev in a pan or in a tube, ready mixed. One thing has to be clear. You can get the grinder. Actually, Rublev sell a really wonderful like starting kit with the grinder on the line. But you can also, if you don't have it, you don't find it for some reason, you can use your pigments. Just you need to separate them really well with a knife, really, really well, and then add some of this gum arabic and see what happens. I suggest you to try it because
Yeah.
it's
So
really
what
fun to make your own.
yeah, if I could just a little bit interrupt, and so in the Laurel, yeah. So then I think the advantages. So like for example, in our line, we have right now we were working, and that's we are working for new. Where is the camera? Okay, here we are working on new website, and now we are making all new swatches for the it's last 6 months. So but so we are making new swatches, and we figure out, so then in tubes we have 45 pigment colors right now. It's then we have probably like around 16 just in pens, and we will talk about why in pens. So but overall it's basically still limited number of, when you go to other companies you can see like 202 different colors. So but we do have more than 200 pigments. So here's your advantage. If we don't make the color what you specifically want, and so what you can do, you can just, it's very inexpensive, the medium what Michele was showing, it's a watercolor medium, and you can buy the smallest amount of the pigment and see how that pigment will specifically work for your advantages or not. And so then, and since we sell everything in very small amounts, so then it will be very inexpensive way to try. And of course every pigment behaves different. That's why in our tubes like literally every color behaves different. So so if we are going back to pens, so I can tell you this because most of this pens colors, it's historical colors. They never they never supposed to be in the tubes. They were ground and made in shells. That's why we are making shells too. And so in order to put that in tubes, so that means we need to suspend the pigment in the binder, and so therefore some of them don't behave very well. And it will be understandable if our colors will be used only by professionals, and so it would be nice. But same time we do understand, and we are for for everybody. And so then people who will just start to work with watercolors, and then they see like or separation, or they see then weird behavior of one or another colors, there's like, oh, something is wrong with this color, and so they can completely freak out. So that's why we are doing on pens. Which, by the way, the question to you, Michele, because I since I'm from Russia, so then I remember that every professional artist mostly were painting that time in from pens, and that's what I hear in Europe. Mostly people using in pens. The tubes are coming just like to buy the tube and squeeze to the pen and work from that.
Yes.
Yeah, but
Yes.
Every time, like when we have classes, every time saying then pens actually much more economical, what I think, because what we do, of course we need to do everything different from everybody else. So then we putting the pens several times. When it's, we put it shrink it, and so we put again and it shrinks again, and it's why all our colors like look like funny, but at the same time you just buying basically concentrated color, where in the tube you still buy with the water. But same time I understand that these days people make even watercolors becoming bigger. Yes, and so that's why it does make sense to like squeeze from the tube, because it's already ready color. And so then
I mean, there's a certain dose of frustration trying to get to activate a pen,
yeah,
and I guess it's very zen. You need to open your pens and just prepare them half an hour before you start drawing. And with the tube, if you're in a rush and you want a creamy color
yes,
ready, you just get it off the tube. Then it stays in the pan, and again, this is really messy, but
love it.
but it is what it is.
Yeah,
This is a pan. Oh,
yeah, yep, yep,
this is a
great.
pen, and it's actually cobalt blue, and has to be in a pen because you explained to me that the tube, doesn't really want to go into a tube.
Yeah,
Aureline yellow is
Aureline, yep, yep,
also a pen because of the color,
thank you.
and other colors are really just creams that a creamy color ready to use. And especially if you paint big, as I said in the video, you need to use tubes because it's so much easier, and you
Yeah.
can you can create a great
Convenient.
quantity of color,
Yeah,
have it in your pens, like even on bigger surfaces, and then use them. But yes, if you have a travel kit, it's so much easier to just use pens, and you don't need to carry the tubes with you. Or you just prepare with the tubes beforehand, and when they're dry, you just
yes,
also with the tubes is the same. When it dries, it reduces in volume, and you add more. But honestly, what you suggest is to make your own, which is sort of I'm not the brand strategist here, but buy Rublev color.
yeah.
So
so
I guess the question though is really, is there what Laura was asking, is there an advantage from your standpoint, from an artist standpoint, of making your own watercolors? Because we do see a lot of people recently making their own watercolors. It's really amazing, actually.
COVID just changed everything. You cannot believe how many watercolor paint making sets we sold in 1 year of 2020. It was amazing. I was just like, what change our perspective to watercolors.
It looks like you're gonna sell more after this interview. Anyway, I will suggest to try, because it's a lot of fun, and you feel proud about your own color, and you feel really proud. You want to use it all the time. I do have some pre-mixed made by myself with the pigment, and they're in my pan, and I always want to use those for some reason. I go through those. Recently, I did some raw sienna. It was really nice, and it's never as good as what Tatiana and George will create for you, because it's so much better. But you made it, and so you feel good about it. And I guess art is about that. It's about having fun.
No, I truly believe
experiment. And you can experiment, Tatiana, with big. I know you paint, and you both paint. And when you experiment with something, as you said, when I invite an artist, it's always a different presentation than what I will make, because I will be either too specific or suggest 20 colors, and the artist comes and says, I only use 3, stuff like that. So I would say having fun with art and art materials is the best, and buying art materials for every artist or art lover is a sort of an orgasmic
that's true.
experience.
That's true.
It's true. And so I'm really glad that I can buy from you. You are a family. You have your own small business, and I'd rather be with, always rather buy from Natural Pigments, Ruplev colors, rather than Winsor & Newton. Although I love Winsor & Newton, but if there's a color I like and you make it, I'll buy it from you. That's as simple as that.
Okay.
There's another question here, Michele, is in the long version of the video, we talk about preparing the support for receiving paint, but you also mentioned in there, but perhaps we can mention this, when you apply watercolor over a drawing. Laurel says, I assume that you fix the drawing first, or do you just apply the watercolor and see what happens?
Well, I wouldn't do it on a finished drawings that you really like, as a first experiment or attempt. I will just get a small drawing you don't care about, and with the same technique and material, try on that first and see how it works, because a lot of it is to balance the charge of the brush. And once the charge is correct, meaning the right amount of water and pigment in your brush, you might be able to apply this layer of color without disrupting anything underneath. In a way, that's why I was pulling up this drawing. In a way, what it could do is to, especially if there's sanguine, some red chalk and black chalk, those can slightly melt and merge together, which will actually make it look much more pictorial, and it's even better. Then afterwards, whatever has been toned down by the layer of water, for some reason, you can fix it, because you're the artist who made it. I mean, I wouldn't do it on somebody else's work. Of course, I would never do that, I will fix it first and then eventually put some whatever you need to put on top of it. But you can never remove anything that is made on paper. So basically, I would suggest do it on your own work and try on a small drawing that you don't care about much first, and then give it a try, because I just gave it a try and it worked, and I was so happy about that. With red chalk.
But you're doing both, yes.
But the question really comes down to you don't fix it first. You don't put a spray of fixative.
He's not, but
because obviously that would change the surface.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I never use any fixative ever on paper.
But you're doing both, and so you're doing watercolors first and then drawing afterwards too, yes?
Yeah, no, obviously.
Yeah.
I recommend to prepare the paper first and then draw on top of it.
Yeah.
And that will allow you to use whites and get highlights and have say medium tonal values, so you only work on darks and lights, such as the Renaissance period. But you can also get an older drawing, as you were asking. You can get an older drawing and give to this drawing a general tone on top of it. And of course, you need the same to have the same materials of the drawing you made, just in case some of these parts of the drawing, sometimes they kind of some of the pigment can go off, and you just fix it. You just make it darker somehow. Minimal amount of work on top of it. Actually, it creates the opportunity to do some more hatching. With watercolor as well, I do that. If I have a watercolor that I've done before and it needs to be revived somehow, it needs more goldy color on top of it. And sometimes when you take a picture of it, you realize that your watercolor is missing some of the warm tones or some cold tones. You can just add this chroma with a new pigment on top of it with a fine layer of watercolor. So I always let it rest a day or two and then do that.
Right.
So we looks like we done, and Michele, I'm so happy finally that interview happened, and so we didn't expect that much advertising, but it's lovely. I love that. And so, and oh, thank you, Ree, you are my rock like always. So yes, thank you very much. so so I hope we will work more with you, and so maybe we will bring you in future. And so something is flying here, that's why I'm so. And thank you, Michele. And please remember, we have Michele's page on our website, so where you can see all his colors, what he likes in our line of colors.
Yeah, definitely visit his website, and you can see his instructions and courses and see some of his work.
And
so
of
really
course, very inexpensive courses, but great courses in Domestika. I highly suggest in this. So thank you very much. Don't forget, we have 20% discount until July 4th on all travel sets. It's a special deal just for people who watch us online.
And I'll put the link in the
Yes.
comments where to get the travel sets.
Thank you, Michele.
Thank you, Michele.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Viva l'arte.
Viva l'arte.